Welcome to the Reclaim Leader podcast. I'm Jason Tucker.
And I'm Jesse Skiffington.
We're two pastors in the trenches who are passionate about church health for greater gospel impact.
We share the ups and downs of ministry, strategies that worked for us,
and some that didn't.
Best practices and practical tools for church leadership.
The goal, to help all of our churches flourish. Let's get started.
See another sunrise, sing a little song.
What is so good to be back, Jesse, talking with pastors, stories from the trenches. And I've been hearing from folks who are listeners that have been enjoying these because I think it's just so encouraging and helpful to hear that, I don't know, that we're not crazy. Like we're going through all the same things that everyone else is going through. This is Pastor Appreciation Month, and we just are trying to show how much we appreciate you pastors for what you do and for the hard work that you're doing. And you're really going to love our conversation today. Sure. And before we get into it, as we ask of you, we're able to do this podcast for free. And it's something that we do because it's what our heart's about. We want to help as many pastors as possible because, as we always say, ministry is hard, and it's so much better when we do it together. So if you'd be willing to share this episode or any of our episodes with a colleague and to spread the word about the podcast, that would really be helpful to us. Or to leave a review on your platform of choice. We love getting reviews. It's so great to hear from you because, you make these episodes and they go out into the universe and you sort of don't know what happens or how it's helping other pastors. So that would be great. And I was made aware by one of our listeners actually this week that on iTunes, and I almost had a panic attack, is if you go onto iTunes, you use iTunes, it's only showing that we have 2 episodes. We have 362 episodes. And I'm like, what happened to the other 360 episodes that we've been curating or cultivating over the last 5 years,
right?
6 years. And, the answer was SoundCloud, who is our host, had some sort of glitch a couple weeks ago, and it's going to take a little time to build everything back. That was the official word I got, but I was freaking out a little bit.
I bet you were.
Anyway,
That's a lot of talking, Jason. That's a lot of words.
If you go onto Spotify or if you go onto our website, all 362 episodes are there. So if you want to look and get some back episodes, and if iTunes isn't working for some reason, hopefully it'll be resolved by the time this comes out. But I did want everybody to know, just in case.
We have done more than 2, I promise.
That's right. Oh my gosh, I was freaking out, man.
many more times than 2, in fact. Anyway, but yeah, really glad to be talking stories in the trenches again, and really thinking pastor appreciation. I appreciate you, Jason. I hope somebody said that to you this month. And if not, you're not overlooked, man. You're doing great work. And all of our pastors, it's hard. It's good. There's beautiful moments. And there's times when we're just feeling the grind and wishing things were different, or, maybe have big questions we're wrestling with, or maybe even our sense of call or things at home are hard. And we don't always have a place to go to talk. And I love, and we'll mention this in a minute, but I love that you and I get to talk before and after when we record, and we just get to connect and check in. How's it going? How are you holding up? And all that. And we need that as pastors. And our guest today is going to help us to think about, what does it mean for a pastor to have a pastor? What kind of need would that meet in our life? How would that make our ministry better or more effective, or help us in some way to continually to discern our call and to succeed in it or thrive in it? So really can't wait to get to share our guests with our listeners today.
Yeah, Pastor David Burke. You could tell he's good at what he does. We were joking in the episode because all of a sudden Jesse and I were talking about all of our stuff.
That's
right.
That's what happens every time I talk to David. It's like,
man,
all of a sudden I'm talking about my kids and my problems with my kids and the challenge and thing. And I'm like, wait a minute, how are you doing? How's
right. Oh, wait, you're our guest. That's great.
Right. That's right.
No, it was really great talking to him. You guys are going to love the interview. But first, I want to we got our last giveaway this week.
Right, yeah.
We're giving away another book. And this is a book that I have really been loving. I'm a big building a sense of urgency with the congregation. That is the number one step, I think, to get change happening. And I think the number one role of the leader is to build a sense of urgency around whatever the ministry problem is we're trying to tackle. And the way that I've had the most success in doing that is to find good research that shows this isn't just a my church thing. this is the thing. This is what's happening all around. And so this book, The Great De-Churching, came out last year. Jim Davis and Michael Graham. It's fantastic. And it's a study. They did a deep dive on the de-churching phenomenon, who's leaving, why they're going, and what it will take to bring them back. It's a book that it shows you very clearly what's going on with different demographics, but also that there's tremendous hope in what's next. So anyway, this is a great book. We're going to give it away, and we picked a name. Here we go. Ready? Everyone do your drum roll at home or in your car, unless you're driving. And the winner of this book is Peter. I don't have a last name. Peter from Gathering PCC. I'm guessing that's another Presbyterian brother, but I don't want to make too many assumptions. But Peter, congratulations. We are going to send you a copy. We're going to reach out via email, and you're going to let us know where to send it. But we're excited that you've won this. We appreciate you. And again, to all of our pastors, even if you're not one of the big winners, we do hope that you feel appreciated this month. And so with that, let's get right to our interview without further ado. This is David Burke.
Well, so good to have the Reverend Dr. David John Burke with us today. And this is, I've talked to DJB. We've, lots of different ways that we refer to the Reverend Burke. But Dave was my boss in Chattanooga, Tennessee, about a lifetime ago, and a lifetime of ministry ago, certainly. And so really grateful to have a good friend, a great pastor, someone who's seen a lot of ministry and has a lot to share with us. So just really super glad to get to welcome you to the podcast. Let's welcome Dave Burke.
Thanks, you guys. Really honored to be here with you and talk through life and ministry. It's great to be with you.
Well, now, and so before we kind of get into some of the conversation about your experiences and things, I thought, introduce us to what you're doing now. You're working with Standing Stone, a ministry that you describe as you're a pastor to pastors. You provide free coaching and care for pastors. Tell us a little bit about that, what you're doing now and the ministry you're involved with.
Sure. So Standing Stone Ministry was born out of Southern California, Jason, where you said you were from. And it was birthed by a couple named Jim and Debbie Hogan, and they were not pastors or paid church staff leaders. They were members within their church. And as leaders within their church, they saw 3 generations of pastors in their life, in their older life, and then in their children's lives have to leave the ministry for a variety of reasons. And they felt compelled to be part of God's solution and helping stem the tide of that. So Standing Stone was birthed originally as a retreat ministry. Jim and Debbie would host clergy couples at their home. Then they built a ranch out in Colorado called Standing Stone. That's where the ministry name comes from. And they would have couples that were in crisis, clergy couples in crisis, come and stay with them, and they would feed them, listen to them, care for them, give them a week of rest and rejuvenation. And they quickly enlisted other friends that had homes that were like respite kind of homes, places for rest and rejuvenation. And Standing Stone began as a retreat ministry. And then about 8 years of doing that, they realized 1 week a year or 1 week every 6 months is not going to stem the tide of ministry burnout and marriage crisis, leadership failure. So they began launching what I am called a field shepherd, a pastor out in the field ministering to other pastors and ministry leaders. And over the last 10 years, it's grown a lot. There are now 260 of us in 39 states in the U.S., and there are a handful of international Standing Stone shepherds as well. And the most recent estimate is that we're meeting with about 3,000 pastors every month to be a safe place, a confidential place for them to share whatever is going on in their life and ministry, and really pastor the pastors.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That is very encouraging to hear that this ministry is happening. And every pastor listening, including Jesse and I mean, it's like I'm resonating immediately. Like, oh, I'm gonna go look that up. That would be really cool.
Maybe we should just hit pause right now and do like a little intervention time or something.
Because we are so fried. Everybody is so fried, and for lots of different reasons. And part of it, of course, is church stuff, but it's even more than that. Just the way that culture is, and the depletion factor without really getting filled up enough. I don't know. Pastors are terrible at Sabbaths, which is kind of ironic, but we are. So anyway, I'm really, really thankful you're doing the work that you're doing.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's fun to talk. We were connecting over the phone. I think was it last Thursday or Friday or something, and we talked a little Huskies, a little Seahawks, and a little bit of the Barna research on just where pastors are. And we've kicked some of that around on a podcast over a couple of episodes, but just let's talk about that for a minute. What's going on? What are we hearing about how pastors are doing? What's the latest research saying, and why is this such a need?
Yeah, great question. So I attended the State of Pastors Summit that Barna did, and I think it was this last April. And the most recent research is showing that 70% of pastors don't feel like they have a close friend that they talk with on a regular basis. 70% of those that were surveyed feel like their self-esteem is lower than when they began their life of ministry, which is a pretty telling statistic, I think. And then I know that this number has changed recently, and you may be familiar with this one, that shortly after the pandemic, 40% of pastors were seriously thinking about quitting. And now I think it's down to about 32%, something like that. But still, that's almost a third of pastors that aren't just going, oh, maybe one day I'll quit, like have seriously thought about hanging it up and moving on to something else, whatever that might be. So, and there are a lot of other statistics that are in that State of Pastors Summit that I think show the mental health wear and tear on pastors. They're pastoring a different kind of church now than they were prior to 2020. And there's a lot of discouragement. Yeah.
We talk a lot about just decision fatigue, just the grind of ministry, the expectations, or the feeling like you're going to say something that's going to undo all your good work. There's just a lot of pressure, I think, too. And I don't know. I was wondering if, is Barna's stuff, is that reflected in your conversations with pastors in the trenches? I mean, sometimes you get a statistical snapshot and you kind of go, okay, is that really true? But does that resonate with what you're hearing from pastors out there?
It does. It does. I would say it is very interesting to me. I've been really doing this work more full time in just the last 6 months, but I will get a phone call or a text and meet up with a pastor for coffee or lunch, or sometimes via Zoom. And within the first 5 to 7 minutes, they'll say something along the lines of, so I've never told anybody this before. And then it is something along the lines of something that's going on in their family, but they don't feel like they could share it with their elder board because, if you can't manage your family well, then what are you doing in church leadership is the way they're thinking. There's something going on in their marriage. There's doubts that they have about their call to ministry. And me listening, encouraging, asking deeper questions, maybe challenging some assumptions. That's what I get to do. And I really think it's a holy ground that I walk on. I'm always a little surprised that people feel like they're going to dump whatever it is in that first conversation. But I think it really shows they know they need to talk to somebody.
Yeah.
They just don't have somebody that doesn't have some sort of dual relationship. Like, even if they have a good friend, let's say they're in an elder-driven church, they might have a good friend on the elder board, but there's always that concern about can I really share my doubts and what's going on at home or any of those things because of that dual relationship? And so somebody from outside their organization whose job it is to pastor, shepherd, care for them, I find that yes, they're talking about the deeper things that matter, of loneliness, anxiety, depression, marital difficulties, leadership challenges, you name it.
Yeah. So a place to be known, to be heard, to be honest. And I think, Jason, you and I started this. When did we start recording? I can't remember. 2017 or something?
2017, fall 2017.
That's how long we've been friends, but also longer than that. But we just started talking shop and found that I find some of the most valuable time. And of course, it's great to record episodes, but it's before and after. Before you came on, I was kind of lamenting. We've had 4 memorial services this month. That's just a lot. And I was like, we've had 22 since, 2021. But there's a way that not everybody has that relationship where we can kind of go, here's what's really going on. And so I appreciate you being able to be there with pastors in the trenches just to get to process in the midst of that, what can be isolating, I think, for leaders.
Yeah. Well, I think that example that you just gave shows the difficult nature of pastoral ministry. You've had a large number of memorial services, and I would imagine in each and every case, it's a different scenario of someone. Maybe it's a sudden death, or maybe it was expected due to their age or some sort of diagnosis. But you just have to keep moving. You don't have a whole lot of time to process yourself. Grief, you're holding the grief of 4 different families in the last month. Not to mention what you're preparing also on a Sunday morning, which I'm sure is a completely different kind of thing. And that expectation to just keep moving forward and not deal with your own stuff because you don't have the margin to do it. I think that can be really wearing on people. And I think we're seeing some of the Barna stats. That's what we're seeing is people going, how long realistically is this a healthy way to enter into people's lives? Is this a healthy way to do this?
Yeah.
Well, again, since the pandemic, I mean, what every pastor needed as we started to reopen was everyone needed a sabbatical. Like everyone needed a break. Nobody got it. It was just full on into this whole new realm of church, which in so many ways has been equally challenging. Maybe not as far as having to decide how to do the unknown, but trying to figure things out. So yeah, I think definitely a lot of pastors, and it's not surprising that it's resonating with the pastors that you're talking to. I mean, just kind of where we're at.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
it is. I know that my own scenario that was there was a lot of, especially in California, we were one of those churches that we had a team of healthcare experts that were counseling us on kind of what was going on, and we asked them, what do you think we should do? Abide by county restrictions and all that, and but when all that was finally restricted, you bet, Jason, everybody's desire was to just jump back into the things that we did. And there was, in some ways, a division among the things that I was hearing. I would hear people say, oh, with all that we had to adapt and do, we're not just going to go back and do everything that we used to do. And a whole nother group of people said, oh, now we can get back to doing everything
finally
we used to do.
Now we can push down the gas pedal again and go for it. And that's right when you and I and all of us in leadership were going, I just need a break. I mean, how many things ended up on pastors' plates that were not there before? Now the pandemic consolidates that. And we're trying to kind of navigate a really complex social and emotional situation for our people, decision fatigue, all the things kind of piling on. And then we get to the end of it and everybody's like, all right. And they're feeling pretty good, but we're like right to the edge. And so I think that's true. And I wanted to drill down, if you're willing to share a little bit more about kind of how did it go? The last couple of months there at Fremont, you were kind of wrestling with some things, and tell us a little bit about that part of the story, whatever you're comfortable sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was really fortunate to have, over the last 5 years of me being a lead senior pastor at that church, 2 different coaches in my life. One was not a pastor. He was a healthcare executive, and one was a pastor. And I don't think he'll mind me saying who he is. If you've read Canoeing the Mountains by Todd Bolsinger or Tempered Resilience, I was really fortunate to have Todd as my pastoral coach over the last 18 months. And both of the coaches in my life helped me wrestle with some of those deeper questions. They were my safe place to go and talk about things. And there were many, many factors. I've been in a small group of men that have met consistently for 28 years. All of us have started doing college ministry together, and now we're all doing different kinds of work. But we had made a commitment to meet together annually for 28 years. And those men have spoken into my life over the last several years. One of them said to me a few years ago, "David, you're the pastor to the pastors." And I didn't know what that meant, but certainly with what I'm doing now, it started to resonate. But there were 2 distinct things that I heard from people that helped me come to a decision that it was time for me to step down from the role that I'd had. And one was this. I met with a spiritual director who said to me, "David, it sounds like you are longing for the hidden work of deeper discipleship." You're longing for the hidden work of deeper discipleship. And something about that phrase, I wrote it down after we met, and I just began to try to think and pray. What I think he's right. What does that mean? I knew that there was this longing within me, that there was the things that I was doing. There was joy, but there was struggle. I felt like something wasn't there. And the hiddenness part is what I began to focus on. And for me, I interpreted the hidden work of deeper discipleship as that I've always had this belief ever since my days of college ministry that I was probably being more effective when I took a student out to lunch or a cup of coffee or an intern and just asked them questions about their life, their faith, how they pictured God, what did they think God's purpose for them was, all those things, than any sermon I ever preached. Now, that's not to denigrate the art of preaching. I mean, I love preaching and teaching, and that was a major part of my role. But I knew I've always held this belief that I saw God at work in those one-on-one conversations more in myself. And I felt like, the Chariots of Fire line comes to mind. I felt God's pleasure in those one-on-one conversations. So, and I actually felt like in my own life that deeper discipleship happened in one-on-one relationship. And so I began to wonder, what would that look like to do not maybe the public work of ministry, but do the things that nobody else sees in the coffee shops or on Zoom or over lunch, where actually real conversations can happen, and hopefully with God's working in the midst of that conversation, deeper discipleship happen. The funnier statement, and I'll explain what was meant by this, is that Todd told me one time after me kind of explaining and wrestling with my role at the church, he said, "David, you're the freaking Queen of England." And I had to laugh like that.
Thanks, Todd. It's helpful.
I'm sorry, can you explain that? He goes, you're the Queen of England. I said, "Can you elaborate what you mean by that?" And he said, "It sounds as if you're in an environment where all of the structures are designed for you to have a performative role with little power to change the structure." And when he explained
what a zinger, by the way.
Yeah, that's powerful.
Exactly. And once he said that, I couldn't unsee it. I'm sure as pastors, the number of times that you feel like you're being asked to just show up at something,
Yep.
to open the meeting, to say the prayer at the event. But maybe your context is different. I felt like the context I was in, they wanted me to do a very few things. They loved the preaching and the teaching, focus on this. But when it came to my own desires to see change and transformation happen in a body of believers, I was not a good fit because that was not the expectation. There was more of a performative kind of role.
Yeah.
Once I saw some of those things, the hidden work of deep discipleship, whether I was a good fit for what felt like a performative role, those two things kind of came together for me to decide to step down. And I'll own this, that I know I was not the best leader at this stage in that church's life to lead the kind of substantive change that needs to happen. So I'll own I didn't have all the skills, the gifts to lead in that way. And I felt like, for this church to really step into its next chapter, whatever that is, I need to take a step back.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's really powerful. I mean, I do think there are times where all of us as pastors have felt that sense of I'm a commodity right now, or I'm playing a function that is distant from what I feel is my true calling in ministry, to want to see people's lives transformed and changed. And sometimes when you're at that higher up leadership level, it just feels like that on the ground, life on life ministry piece is what it goes missing the most. And when you do it, there's even some guilt about, am I spending my time wisely? I should be working on the budget, or I should be working on this, or I should be leading a session meeting or a retreat or something. And I remember you said something, and when we were talking about just how there's something in the way that the church in North America has been in its history, and it needs to give way to something else to be healthy. But we're sort of stuck in this picture of what a pastor of a successful church looks like and does. And I think there's some work to do in the midst of that.
Yes, absolutely. And some of the pastors that I meet with, I meet with lead pastors or senior pastors, the ones that are primarily charged with the communication piece of ministry, and also some associate pastors. I find this weariness among those that do it regularly. Next week I'm up again. Next week I'm up again. Next week I'm up again. And always trying to hone that skill and that art, and it wears on you. And then among the associate pastors that get to do it not as often, they're longing for more and more and more of it. Because they see that in the North American church, particularly, that the communication gift is elevated above so many others. And there's this default belief that it's the teaching and preaching that will lead to success and growth. And I think in the North American context, we see this great amount of attention on that. And you have to wonder, what will that lead to? This insistence that our growth as a body is going to come at the one with the really great gift at doing this as much as humanly possible in a year. No, we can't have you go away for 4 weeks because this will decline if you do. Those kinds of conversations.
Yeah. I remember, was it Redeemer, Jason, that stopped saying when Tim Keller wouldn't be preaching?
Yes. Yeah. They wouldn't share his schedule because they didn't want people not to come. And, they're making a point. I think there's a real tension, though, even just, we're nowhere near Redeemer level, but, you sort of become, for people, it's kind of like their trusted doctor. And if you go to see the doctor and there's an unexpected substitute, you're like, you're not my doctor. I'm not, I didn't want to come. I feel like there's something like that going on when people show up to worship, because worship itself has become such a passive I think, performative experience where it's there's consumerisms all over it. So I think on one level, it's like, am I being fed? Am I resonating with the preacher? Is it speaking into my life? And if you find somebody who's doing that, you feel like you struck gold, because you're probably only giving that 1 hour a week. You know, most people, they're not doing another study. They're not in a small group. That's like their time where they're trying to figure it all out. And there's all this pressure on the sermon to proclaim and to teach and to, you know, all these other things that it's doing.
And to make us laugh and make us cry.
Exactly. And it's become really unhealthy. But I think for a lot of us who are in the main preaching role, we feel sort of stuck. Like, what do we do? I honestly, I struggle with, I can't take multiple weeks away because I'm going to hear about it. And I just don't want to hear about it.
Yeah.
But there's also like, so I'm resonating deeply with the idea that just feeling like we're sort of stuck in this in between what it has been, what it is now, and what it needs to be, I think is really hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. This is getting me thinking too. And I was talking to our assistant pastor here at Marine View, and we were talking about how we miss the days of college ministry. We both had some experiences there. And I worked with Dave for a year in Chattanooga before you kicked me out and made me go somewhere else. No, it was great. I was an intern at the Presbyterian campus ministry there on Oak Street. It was on Oak Street, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Anyway, one of the great years of my life, and of course, met my future wife there and all kinds of things. So thank you for that experience. But and you encouraged me. I remember a pastor to pastors before I was even close to that. I was thinking about law school. A job opportunity for college ministry came up, and you said, why don't you give this another chance? See if this may be something God's doing in your life. So you were a pastor to pastors then and still are. But even thinking back to those days, the highly relational environment of that life on life ministry, I think it was powerful and meaningful. And here were young people at this phase of life where they were asking big questions, wrestling with big decisions. And now it's almost like we're a shopkeeper, a CEO, there's meaningful interactions. There's good things. I don't want to discount the good that God does in it through our ministries and the way people's lives are changed. But I feel like I long to get back to those days where I could just go shoot hoops and talk about life with someone. And maybe it's shame on me for not creating an environment. We always talk about the environment that exists is what you've created or allowed, right? So after 15 years, if I haven't found a way to do that, I guess I'm part of the problem. But I miss those days. And I hear us kind of saying that there's something in this pastoral call that is maybe missing from a lot of our roles when we're more in that performative mind.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to be fair, the college years, you have more disposable time than almost at any other time in your life, except, for 16 years, I heard college students say, oh, I'm so busy. And time
yeah, you're right. You don't know what busy is.
We had 6 kids and I was going, really? You think you're busy? I do think there's a unique time frame to be able to have those long, and I think now, Jason, you were saying the commitment that even our most faithful people in the congregation can give is that 1 hour a week. And what's the statistic? Your most faithful people attend 1.7 Sundays a month.
Yeah.
Those are your most faithful folks. So I think that the amount of time that's available for that life on life ministry is less. That being said, it's still vital, I think, to really forming community, deepening discipleship, because what we're getting in the North American church right now is has a semblance of discipleship, but it's fully dependent on a 20, 25, 30, 30, however long you preach in that hour. And then the rest of the week, yes, we can fill space with digital ways of discipleship and all that, but the voices and the time and the commitments drown all that out until the next Sunday.
Yeah, it's tricky. I don't know, Jason, how have you guys I know you've been working on some of this. How do you drill down into more of how do we form disciples beyond the Sunday?
Yeah, so we've been talking a lot over the last 6 months about what does that look like to create, to really, and this is not new revolutionary language, but what does it look like to align all of our staff and ministries and everything we're doing, discipleship as its core? Everything is discipleship. So how are we leveraging every opportunity to help people have, first of all, build spiritual friendships, because you can't have discipleship without human beings, and how do we bring people from outside the walls of the church, have them engaged in the church and feel like they are growing as followers of Jesus? So thinking about our programs, our events, our studies, small groups, worship, all that stuff, to try to align it all. And it's obviously it's a work in progress, and it always will be. But just thinking about everything you do as a church as a conduit of discipleship, I think is an important step. And you would think that's something we just think of naturally and be like, no, duh, which maybe some pastors are saying right now. But I don't know. I think it's so easy to get hung up on all the other stuff that we forget that, or we don't connect the dots with all the different disparate parts of the church.
Yeah, I think what you learned in your youth ministry days and what I learned in college ministry days, and I think, Dave, you too, is that there's a skill set that comes with being able to sit with someone and help them take steps to move forward in their life and faith, and to listen well and to reflect, back what maybe you hear God doing in their life. And we have a couple of folks working with Jim Singleton to talk to figure out what does life on life or one-on-one or micro discipleship look like, and how do we encourage not just the staff and leaders to do it, but to equip people to be disciples who make disciples and walk alongside each other. And it's obvious, it's the most obvious thing, but there's so many constraints in our kind of modern mindset. And the place that I'm finding the most traction right now, which is funny because it's kind of like college ministry in reverse, is actually at the retirement homes where people have a lot of time on their hands again. And some of our biggest life transformation is happening in the lives of people who now have too much time on their hands again and are asking big questions and wrestling. And so some of my favorite stuff to do is just go hang out. I can't play hoops quite the same way as maybe college ministry, but it's just meeting people where they are.
By the way, this is amazing. We're half an hour in, and something about David, I feel like we haven't stopped talking. So
David's
he's drawing that out of us. He's drawing out all of our issues are coming out.
No,
Dave.
truly. Every time you talk with David, you will get
showing your gifts.
You will go deeper for sure.
But I do want to ask you, in your experience as a pastor, and you have this chance to kind of speak to other pastors right now, what's something or a couple of things that you wish you would have done more of when you were in that lead pastor, kind of in the grind role in that way? Looking back, are there some things that are clear to you?
Well, that's a really good question. I think I would have tried to I think I would have tried to do what Jesse was just talking about, make those one-on-one conversations more a part of my regular life and protect those.
Yeah.
And ones in which there weren't a dual relationship. So I've mentioned this earlier that even I served a church that was, 1,000 members on the membership roll and 35 people on staff. And even when I sat down to meet with a staff member there, I was always wearing two hats. Mm-hmm. Even if I came in with questions like, hey, how's your family? How are your kids doing? I saw you were at a soccer tournament or whatever. Eventually there's always in the back of my mind is that I have the head of staff hat on too, and there are performance reviews and all that kind of stuff. I think I would have tried to find people that I could do that life on life discipleship with that I loved in college ministry, but that's the way that I'm wired.
Yeah.
Like I talk to a lot of pastors that aren't wired that way, and that's fine. I mean, God makes us differently.
So some people are more overarching leadership systems thinker and stuff.
Totally.
But I think I'm kind of wired that way in some respects. And I know that when I lose touch with personal discipleship, even if it's just 1 or 2 a week or whatever, I quickly lose a sense of why what we're doing matters. And so even for a pastor like me that tends to think more systems and process and, whatever, I if I lose touch with that disciple making and just that I'm pouring into someone's real life. And I noticed that, Jason, and you and I reflected on this in the pandemic when we weren't around people, it felt like, what is the point? And so even just touching back, even if it's not, you're a pastor at heart. I mean, at the deepest core of who you are. And I'm like, I have to convince myself of self to care sometimes. And that's a problem too, probably. But to have that context where that relationship is there, I find it life-giving, even if it's not the primary focus. I think it's important for all of us as pastors, even if we're a little wired, as system-minded people. So I don't know. Anyway, so this is really good. And I think, Jason, we should wrap up the episode and then we'll get some more coaching from Dave to work out all of our particular issues. But what else do you want to say to pastors? I mean, if somebody's listening, what do you want them to hear? What would you want to say?
Yeah, I would say I recognize that there are a lot of barriers to pastors with the week in, week out, putting on the worship service and preparing, and not to mention the things that come up like memorial services and weddings and crises and all of that I know and I felt that finding a place for myself felt selfish. And to ask some questions about that, because we all need to be poured into. And so whether it's a spiritual director or a therapist or somebody like a, Standing Stone kind of person, I think having that safe space is so vital, where you're not concerned or about having to put on a particular kind of face in a space where you think there's an expectation of you. I think that kind of relationship is vital, and to find that a coach, I was really fortunate to have 2 different coaches that helped me discern this transition. And I'll briefly just say kind of the trajectory of my time as a senior pastor went like this. In the first, couple of years, I found myself asking, okay, how does somebody be a senior pastor? How does somebody be a senior pastor? Read the people, talk to wise mentors. How do you do this role? And then somewhere around year 4 or 5, I started asking, okay, hold on a minute. How do I be a senior pastor?
Yeah.
That's a shift, because I can't do what you do. I can't do what all, my friends that lead these churches do. I'm not wired that way. And eventually, after kind of leaning into that question for a few years, the final question for me that the men in my life who were coaches said was this. It's like, should I be a senior pastor? There are unique challenges to that role that may not be a good fit for me. And that's what I ultimately came up with. But it was having people to talk that out with without fear of repercussions, or like, well, if you're asking those questions, you probably shouldn't be here. Let's just let you go. It was me having a safe place to do that. So I think that's super important to have in a pastor's life, ministry leader's life.
Yeah, it's really good.
Well, Dave, thank you so much for your time today, man. It's great talking to you. I feel like we could probably talk to you for another couple of episodes, but no, it's great. How can people reach out or kind of track with you or Standing Stone? Is that
Standing Stone? The website is standingstoneministry.org, and if you go to that website, and depending on what part of the country you're in, you press connect with a shepherd in it, and they usually funnel it to different people. Like I said, there's 260 of us now around the country that are doing that. I occasionally write in a blog on davidjburke.com. I'm not great about it, but there's the information about Standing Stone is also always linked to the stuff that I write about. And on that, I do write about the things that I'm hearing pastors talk about. So
I love it. Your newsletter is good, man. Don't sell it short. So tell us again, if somebody wanted to sign up for that, where would they go?
So for my newsletter, if they went to davidjburke.com, and down at the bottom of that, there's a link to my Standing Stone website.
Excellent. Nice. Yeah. Well, we want to connect people in. I love hearing your updates and what you're working on. And I appreciate you, Dave. I really do. And all that God has done in my life through you. So I know that is true I'll speak for Robbie. I know we were talking about that, and Becky and so many others that you've had an impact on. And so we're grateful for you and look forward to seeing what this new season of ministry is going to be like and what God will continue to do in those hidden places of discipleship.
Yeah. Thanks, you. I really enjoyed being with both of you on this today.
Well, Jason, I don't know if you can tell, but I'm a pretty big fan of David Burke. He's had a huge impact on my life, and I'm grateful for him, for his ministry, what he's doing now. And I got to tell you, it's a great fit. So my takeaway really, I think for me, for you, for our listeners is if you're a pastor, find a pastor for yourself.
Yeah.
We need those voices in our life, those places we can go just to kind of get everything out and be heard and encouraged and all that kind of thing. That life on life discipleship that we do for others, we need that for ourselves too. So anyway, that's my takeaway. Just as a pastor, have a pastor in your life that can be your pastor. Yeah.
And this came up when in last week's episode, when we were looking at what are the 7 things that we sort of discovered in our pastoral interviews this month. Mm-hmm. One of them was all about self-care, that self-care is way more important than we realize. And it came up again in a big way today
Yeah.
And so then I think the next logical question is, okay, well then what do I do about it? How do I start doing it? And I think maybe just one step to take. Mm-hmm. If you're going to do one thing, it's to find another pastor who can pastor you, or someone who can listen and then speak into your life, whatever that looks like.
Yeah. And it could be someone in your community, another pastor that's maybe a season further down the road in ministry, or it could be something like Standing Stone. And what I love about that ministry is it's a free resource. I mean, these guys fundraise and do other things outside of their work with pastors so that it can be free pastoral coaching and counseling and care for pastors. That's the heart behind it. And so if something resonated with what David was saying and you want to connect with him and you're having trouble connecting the dots with Standing Stone or something, just reach out to Jason or Jason or Jesse at reclaimleader.com, and we'll make sure to connect the dots for you and make sure you get connected in with those resources. But we need that. We need those kinds of voices and that kind of care. And I got to be honest, as much as you and I are good at caring for each other, we all need a David Burke kind of.
Yeah, we absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
We kind of encourage each other along the road, but there's pastors who really have that pastor's heart for other pastors. And I love that part of his call. And we're going to dive into an episode, which may then on the back end of it require some pastoral care for us. So we might have to have David back on to help us. But we're going to be talking about how do we talk about the election? We're coming right up against the election here. And on the far side of that, how are you going to talk about it with your people? And so, Jason, we're going to venture into this territory. And I think you and I both are like, should we be doing this? I don't know, but we're going to go for it anyway.
Yeah. And the desire here is, it's really a pastoral desire for ourselves and helping other pastors who are really struggling with, how am I going to talk about this? So when this episode airs, we'll be a week away from election day. And I don't know, the anxiety's starting to go through the roof. And it's been a rough political cycle anyway.
Yeah.
So how do we address it with our congregation? Maybe you're in a church, pastor, where this is no big deal. You talk about it all the time or whatever. It's just not a thing. But at least in my context, I need to have some real thought about how am I going to address it, however it goes. So anyway, our attempt is to be helpful, and we know there's not going to be a lot of headspace to think about much else. So we figured let's just lean into it, and do an episode.
That's right. And this, we're going to turn the reviews off for this one episode.
That's right. Don't leave a review based on this episode.
No, not really. Can't wait to be a part of that conversation with you.
All right, everyone. Thanks for being with us. As we always say, ministry is hard. It is so much better when we do it together. Take care.